Okay, let's talk about something I'm sure you're familiar with, return on investment. So if we look at the slide, our return on investment is our EBIT, or income before interest and taxes, divided by our average operating assets. So return on investment is your return, your EBIT, your income before interest and taxes, divided by your operating assets. So how much money you put into cash, accounts receivable, and so on, fixed property, plant, equipment, and so on. All the money you put in, how much money did you get out in a percentage formula? So return on investment would show you your profitability or your gain from your investment. There's one caveat we should have to discuss, which is net book value versus gross cost. Most companies use the net book value of the depreciable assets to calculate average operating assets. So the average cost minus depreciation equals net book value. Now, I will say that, say, if you're running a fleet of limos, your acquisition costs every year, the value of your limos is going to fall because cars fall in value. On the other hand, remember when you're doing financial analysis that not everything that is depreciated falls in value. Certainly land, buildings, and other things do not fall in value over time. So be careful in your financial analysis. In this class, everything is depreciated. We use net book value, no problem. In most of your school, it will too. However, remember in the real world that if you've depreciated a building down to zero, more than likely it's still worth more than zero. So therefore, we want to make sure we're capable of remembering in the real world that sometimes net book value is not relative to the actual price. So moving on, we can break the ROI into two different parts. If we add sales in there as a component, we can turn net operating income, we break it into margin, which is net operating income divided by sales, and we multiply it by turnover, which is sales divided by average operating assets. So we essentially would cross out the sales and we would be back to where we started. If we leave the sales in, we can break it into two different components. When we look at the two different components in an example, we take Regal Company, which has the following facts. Net operating income 30, average operating assets 200, sales 500, operating expenses 470. So what is the Regal Company ROI? And of course ROI here we want to do it through margin times turnover. So we already can look at this example and say, oh, well, we've invested quite a bit of money. We have some money coming out of it. The question is, what is our return on all that investment? So to calculate that, we would simply plug into the formula. The return on investment is $30,000, which is our net operating income, divided by sales of $500,000, which is 6%. And we multiply that by $500,000 worth of sales divided by $200,000 worth of operating assets, and we find that's 2.5. And so 6% times 2.5 is a return on your investment of 15%. If we just took the 30,000 divided by 200,000, you'd also find a result of 15%. We've just broken into two parts so we can decide how we're doing with regard to our turnover and regard to our margin. How are we really making the money? And in some cases, you'll find that because you have very small assets involved, in other words, you started a computer company and your assets are an office and some computers, then you're going to have very small operating assets, and so the turnover is going to be quite large, even though maybe the operating margin is very small, the margin on your sales is small, the turnover could be quite fast. On the other hand, if you built a railroad, you're going to have quite a bit of average operating assets for your sales, and so your turnover might be very, very slow, but your margin on it might be very large to get the same amount of profitability. So by breaking it into two different pieces, we get a little better view of exactly what's going on. Now we can take this into our analysis and look and see if we make a investment into our operating assets and to see how it does with sales. So in this case, we assume the manager invests in a $30,000 piece of equipment that increases sales by $35,000 and increases operating expenses by $15,000. So now we have numbers of $50,000 for net operating income, $230,000 for average operating assets, Sales 535 and operating expenses of 485. Let's calculate the new ROI, and we simply go to the slide. And we find that the net operating income is $50,000, the sales is $535,000, and then the which is 9.35%. The turnover, of course, is a little bit less. 535 divided by 230 is 2.33. So we've increased our margin, but we've decreased our turnover. But the net effect of both of those is we've increased our ROI to 21.8 from 15. So our turnover was less because we have more operating assets. We bought another piece of equipment, so the turnover was less, but that equipment increased our profit margin. So you can see by breaking it apart, you can do a little bit better analysis of exactly what would go on and what was happening inside your investment, whether you were increasing a piece of equipment or whatever other change you were making. So breaking it into pieces, in fact, we can even break it into further pieces in the DuPont formula, but we'll push that forward. For now, the return on investment, if you just break it into margin turnover, you can look at it in that way, and that will look at your decentralized organization's return on investment.